This is University Lecture. Welcome to another in the series of lectures given on the campus of Iowa State University in Ames. Today, Dr. William Paddock, botanist and author, with the Iowa State University Botany Club's Lecture of the Year. Dr. Paddock's topic is The Agricultural Scientist, a Potential Disaster Maker. Dr. Paddock.
It's indeed an honor to, as a botany alumnus, botany club alumnus of some 28 years or so ago, it's an honor to be back here in such a fantastically beautiful auditorium. I would normally say it's my pleasure to be here, but I have such a dismal subject to speak about tonight. I think the word is wrong, and furthermore, earlier this year, I was on a program at North Carolina University, and I was preceded by a psychiatrist who spoke on sex on the campus, and he began by saying, "It's my pleasure." So I think it's inappropriate, and without saying whether or not I'm enjoying the subject, I think I will begin by saying that as an agriculturalist myself, I tend to blame all the problems of the world on the medical profession. Population, urban sprawl, congestion, and even military dictatorships, all on the medical doctor. Now, I know this is an oversimplification, but assuredly most of the problems of the world can be traced to the number of people we have with us, the number which is growing and growing every day. It took from the Stone Age up until 1850 for us humans to produce 1 billion people on Earth at one time. Then it took only 80 years to produce the next billion people, for us to double. Now, I know that there are many causes for this population doubling in just 80 years from 1850 to 1930. We had during this period our Middle West opened up, and it began feeding a fair share of the world. Transportation was improved so that available food supplies could be made more generally available to the cities. We had the railroads come of age. The fruits of the Industrial Revolution became available for many. But the number one dominating, overriding cause for this population explosion was the discovery of the causes and the cures of a host of human killers, such as plague, yellow fever, cholera, typhus, diphtheria, amoebic and bacillary dysentery, tuberculosis, and malaria, all discovered since 1850. The world has not suffered from a major pandemic in over 50 years, not since 1919, when 25 million people died from influenza. And almost simultaneously with this discovery of the causes and cures for these diseases, there was a near flood of medical missionaries which went out throughout the underdeveloped world carrying the gospel of cleanliness to the unwashed. And the simple introduction of rudimentary hygiene, sanitation, and boiled water resulted in dramatic changes in the death rates. In Asia and Latin America and Africa, the death rate dropped from 38 per thousand in 1875 down to a mere 15 in 1970. The birth rate, however, remained virtually unchanged. Modern medicine then gave the world death control without a parallel birth control, and the population exploded. Now, you're all familiar with these figures, how many people there are and how many there are going to be. To repeat them is a monotonous sort of thing. It's a boring sort of thing. In fact, it's the same sort of situation that Zsa Zsa Gabor's fifth husband found himself in As he said, he knew what he was supposed to do, but how was he to make it interesting? In 1952, I wrote my first article on the population food problem, entitled Can We Make the World Feed Us All? It was written for the Saturday Evening Post, a magazine which then had a circulation of 7.5 million. I know most of you don't remember the magazine, but it did have a large circulation at one time. The article was graphically illustrated. I had nothing to do with that. Of course, it was superbly written. But in that, from that article for a magazine with 7.5 million circulation, the editors got only 4 letters. No one was interested in the subject of population explosion in the 1950s. For in the 1950s, those who spoke about the world becoming overpopulated were generally put down as Cassandras and blind to all the wonderful new things that science is going to bring to the world. And indeed, there was gigantic progress in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Yet all the time, modern medicine was producing longer and longer lifespans in those very regions, and some remarkable things happened in the 1950s. In Latin America alone, if you can imagine, the 10-year span in the 1950s, the death rate fell by 37%. So we had a bigger and bigger population coming along, but surprisingly enough, the population was doing a pretty good job of feeding itself. Much of the credit was given to the U.S. agricultural scientist and the agricultural technology he was taking abroad. In fact, he was beginning to replace in importance the medical missionary of the previous generation. I like to think that part of the responsibility for this change goes to Iowa's own Henry Wallace, who in 1940, as Vice President-elect, was sent by President Roosevelt to Mexico to represent the United States as for the inauguration of President Manuel Avila Camacho. At that time, Wallace represented, he was sort of the symbol of dynamism in American technical agriculture. And his enthusiasm, and he stayed on in Mexico, stayed there 6 months, or 6 weeks rather, and ended up by establishing an agricultural experiment station in Mexico for a corn breeding station, Mexico's first corn improvement program, actually. When he came back, he spoke to Fosdick, who was then president of the Rockefeller Foundation, and according to Fosdick's words, Wallace said, if anyone could increase the yield per acre of corn and beans in Mexico, it would contribute more effectively to the welfare of the country and happiness of its people than any other plan that could be devised. Actually, Henry Wallace once told me that what he actually said was, if you want to get the Mexicans healthy, get some beans and corn in their stomach and forget about the medicine. In any case, at that time, the Rockefeller Foundation had a medical team in Mexico consisting of some 60 technicians. The Rockefeller Foundation started phasing out this program and inaugurated its first foreign agricultural program as a result of this suggestion on the part of Henry Wallace. It was out of this same program, the work on the dwarf wheats, and Dr. Norman Borlaug's program was a part of this. And it was out of this that he won the Nobel Peace Prize last year and spoke here earlier this year. The 1940s and 50s saw similar agricultural programs sponsored by the U.S. and other parts of the world. Forgotten today is the fact that our very first foreign aid program, the forerunner of our $120 billion we've spent in foreign aid, was a small agricultural experiment station in Peru, at Tingo Maria, the first sustained foreign aid program on the part of the U.S. Also in the 1940s, Iowa State University had the only privately supported agricultural research program overseas. This was opened in 1945 by Iowa State in Guatemala by Dr. I.E. Melus, a most remarkable scientist, a man who was on the faculty here for some 40 years, one of the most remarkable men I've ever known. This program developed some corns for Guatemala. He took these corns to Southeast Asia, and out of these corns came a program and varieties which made Thailand the fourth largest corn exporter of the world. So there was some progress in agriculture and a degree of hope that there would be a way to avert the calamity which some were beginning to see as a result of the increase in population due, as I say, to the medical profession. There was, however, little reason for optimism at this time. Prior to World War II, the nations of Asia, Africa, and Latin America were net exporters of grain, but by the 1950s they had become importers. Population had grown, the situation changed dramatically. People still did not worry, though, because up until 1957 and 59, the world as a whole was still doing pretty well in total production. It was, in fact, increasing production somewhat faster than the number of mouths to be fed. This was a period when the American agricultural scientist abroad was receiving a certain amount of publicity, and his few successes began to reach the popular press. Yet I emphasize that this increase in agricultural production in the developing world was only slightly due to agricultural science. It was almost entirely due to increasing the amount of land that could be farmed. By farming further and further up the mountainsides and farther out into the jungle, they were able to increase their agricultural production. It was when they ran out of this land, new land to put into production, that the developing world lost the capacity to feed itself. Under President Kennedy, the United States felt obliged to begin massive food shipments to the developing world. In 1965-66, when India had a drought, we found ourselves shipping 20% of our entire wheat crop to that nation alone. It was an example of how the developing countries could not cope by themselves with any bad weather. Thus, less than 4 years ago, nearly everyone concerned with the world food problem was warning of impending famine in the hungry world of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Agricultural science could not save the world, they said. Disaster lay as close, according to some, as 1975. That was 4 years ago. Today, the warnings are entirely different. Today, we are told that these same countries have too much food, and the farmers are, as a result, going to lose money because of low prices. We hear of the Philippines having self-sufficiency in rice production for the first time in history. We hear of Vietnam having self-sufficiency in spite of a war going on. And India is talking about self-sufficiency, and even Pakistan, or at least prior to the recent rebellion in East Pakistan, was talking of self-sufficiency in cereals. This sudden reversal is said to be due to a green revolution based on a number of things, but primarily on new wheat varieties and new rice varieties which agricultural science has developed for the hungry world. Agricultural scientists of the Rockefeller Foundation, with some financial help, the Ford Foundation. Thus, the science of agriculture is now said to have given man another chance, a chance to correct his environmental population imbalance, which medical science had so brutally upset. Let me quote from a number of sources about the claim given to this green revolution, based on high-yielding varieties with wheat and rice, along with irrigation and fertilizer. Last year, in making the announcement that Dr. Norman Borlaug had won the Nobel Peace Prize because he had been the prime mover of the Green Revolution, the chairman of the committee making the award said, and I quote, "The Green Revolution makes it possible to abolish hunger in the developing countries in the course of a few years. It has contributed to the solution, and I'm quoting, of the population explosion. In short, we do not any longer have to be pessimistic about the economic future of the developing countries. End of that quote. Lyle Schertz, head of the Foreign Agricultural Division of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, says the Green Revolution has given the world new confidence that food crises are a thing of the past. Don Parlberg, Assistant Secretary of Agriculture, says that it is one valuable time in which to check the growth rate of population in the hungry world. Former head of our foreign aid program says it has bought us 20 years in which to solve the population problem. And our Secretary of Agriculture, Clifford Harden, says that the technology to feed the world's population of 2,000 is available, and it's available to feed it better than they have ever been fed before. World Bank President Robert McNamara speaks of decades of time and says that wholesale famine is not inevitable. Norman Borlaug, in his speech accepting the Nobel Peace Prize, spoke of 30 additional years. Even though the world population is currently growing at the rate of 74 million people a year, or 200,000 a day, and even though many of the developing nations will double their population in 21 years, this fulsome chorus of decades in which to solve the population explosion gives us a nice feeling of peace and safety. The agricultural scientist has, or so it seems, pulled a mighty hot potato out of the fire. Namely, no longer is it necessary for us to worry too frantically about the population explosion. Yet, I feel that this one more chance that has been given mankind has somewhat the same wisdom of the football coach asking a professor to give his star player one more chance at a math exam which he's flunked so he can play in the homecoming game. The math professor says, fine, send him over, I'll give him another test. This time with one question, he passes it, fine, he plays. If he doesn't, he's out. So the coach takes the player over, they sit down, the professor says, all right, here's your question. What is 4 times 4? And the football player thinks for a minute and says, 4 times 4 is 16. Whereupon the coach says, please, professor, give him another chance. Well, I think this another chance that we have, that agriculture has given mankind, smacks of somewhat the same wisdom. I say this because many believe that the high hopes attributed to the Green Revolution are premature. For one thing, all, and I repeat all, who have said the Green Revolution has bought us 15 or 20 or 30 years or decades in which to solve the world population problem, all have said so from a gut feeling. Not one has given any form of statistic to back up the point of view. At least I've seen none. As for myself, I personally feel that the increases in agricultural production during the past 4 years has been due more to an improvement in weather than to, that is, more rainfall in Asia, than it has been to the high-yielding varieties. And I think that the optimism, the excessive optimism placed on the increases in 2 crops, wheat and rice, disregard factors which cannot be expanded indefinitely. They must be raised on the very best land in the country. They must have controlled irrigation, must be highly fertilized. They must be subsidized heavily. Pakistan and India subsidize their wheat growers at 100% above world market price. Thus, I have doubts that the Green Revolution, and in fact, I expect to see serious food shortages in the 1970s. The threat of famine once again will loom in parts of this globe within a decade. But tonight, I don't wish to talk about what I think, what I expect in the 1970s. Instead, let us assume that the optimists of the Green Revolution are indeed totally 100% correct, that everything that they say is correct, and it has indeed bought 20 or 30 years in which to solve the world population problem. Accept that as a fact. Now, what can be done in 20 or 30 years? There is obviously only two ways to control the world population problem. The first is to increase the death rate. Now, this can be effective. We can have a famine, we can have pestilence, we can have a war. All of these would be effective in controlling the population growth. However, no one is talking about this, so I must assume that the only way that they are looking for a control is through the other method, and that is to lower the birth rate. For instance, Lester Brown, a USDA economist and the only man to do a book on the Green Revolution, has said that the current agricultural breakthrough will buy time in which to achieve some technological breakthrough in contraceptive technology. Last month, a group of 22 American Nobel laureates joined together to urge major increases in research in order to discover an improved birth control method. And our foreign aid program is advocating the same thing. So everyone is looking towards some breakthrough in birth control methods. Thus, to answer the question, what can we do with 20 or 30 years that the Green Revolution supposedly has given us, we should look at what science can in fact do to find a new, and this time really effective, birth control method. What is science actually doing? Certainly all agree that the current methods, the intrauterine device, the IUD, the pill, and the condom, are ineffective as far as the developing world is concerned. The IUD, the great hope of the 1960s, has proven to be a failure in the developing world. About half of the women who use them remove them within 2 years. The poorer the woman, the lower her nutritional level, the more malignant are the side effects of the IUD. The pill is a similar disappointment. They have found that women in the developing world simply aren't motivated strongly enough to stick with the pill. For instance, in Jamaica, 50% of the women who started taking the pill stopped within a year. Similar statistics are available for Morocco, Pakistan, and Ecuador. The condom is probably the most effective birth control device because of lack of side effects. However, in the developing world, experience has shown, unfortunately, that the men are much less motivated in wanting to control fertility than are women. So much for current methods. But the Green Revolution is said to have given us all this extra time in order to develop something new. What are the possibilities? To answer that, you must understand the problem faced today by the pharmaceutical companies in the development of new birth control drugs and devices, at least in the technically advanced countries, foremost of which is the United States. The advanced countries which have a virtual scientific monopoly in the field of reproductive physiology. One must recognize the stifling effect that current preoccupation over drug safety has had in forcing the Food and Drug Administration to tighten its requirements, to redefine ever more strictly its tolerance of acceptable side effects and toxicity levels. The present situation is such that many people feel that without question that the pill and maybe even aspirin and quinine would not be approved by the FDA if they were new drugs coming on the market for the first time today. Recently, I was with a friend of mine who works for a pharmaceutical company which has birth control drugs and veterinary proprietary drugs, and he told me that his company has pulled its entire research and development staff off of the development of new drugs and put them to work in developing means of detecting ever smaller residual traces of the very drugs which they have been selling for years. This is in anticipation of more strict FDA requirements. In other words, the FDA is sort of redefining zero every day for them. Thus, they have stopped developing new drugs to keep their old ones on the market. Carl Djerassi, a biochemist at Stanford University and one of the key men in developing the pill, has written extensively, and I've used much of his information for some of my conclusions this evening, on the time required today to test and bring onto the market new drugs. He is broken down by the number of months, the time needed to synthesize and to make pre-formulation studies, to experiment on laboratory animals, to evaluate the toxicity and biochemical metabolism tests, to make the necessary clinical tests, etc., broken this down by months, added them all up, and he says that everything goes perfect, which it never does. But if everything goes perfect, the time required is from 10 to 20 years today, and it's getting longer every year. Some have suggested that we might speed this up, shorten this period by testing our drugs not on Americans and U.S. citizens, but by going to Bolivia or Peru or India, and where regulations are not so stringent. But anyone who suggests this is really being unrealistic. No company, not even the United States, could risk the image that this would result in. Thus, looking at the state of present development of new drugs, press articles to the contrary, a study of the present state of development of the once-a-month pill shows that this will not be available until at least 1985. The morning after, or the abortion pill, is in a similar state, just as far down the road. The male contraceptive is equally far down, probably further. A recent World Health Organization report says that no chemical agent involved is suitable for use in humans owing to known potential toxicity. This is the male contraceptive. Anyway, it probably wouldn't make any difference because I've already said that the male is less interested in decreasing his fertility than is the woman. Thus I warn, do not look for any science breakthrough to be developed in these 20 or 30 years that the Green Revolution supposedly has given us. Nothing new, way out. For example, a sterilant to be added to the drinking water to reduce the fertility of a community is simply not in the realm of possibility in this century. It has to be tested on men. Where do you find enough men who are willing to be tested on? You know, you can't have the cows or the chickens drink the water and lose their fertility, so you have to start out with men. We don't know how to do this. In reviewing the time required for the testing of such methods of birth control as an immunological approach, Gerasi concludes that the whole project is so remote that it does not merit serious consideration in this century. Thus I emphasize that the world will not have, before the mid-1980s, anything to control fertility which is significantly different than what we have today. And we won't have it before the year 2000, according to Gerasi, unless there is a radical change in patent laws and the FDA regulations and massive support, government support of research. Paradoxically, it probably doesn't make any difference, because if tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock there was discovered a perfect birth control agent, totally accepted to the church, acceptable to everyone, totally inexpensive, totally safe, and immediately available to the entire world, it probably would have only a minor impact on the growth of the world's population. The reason I say this is that in order for any birth control method to work, it's got to be used. And the basic problem is that people love children. They like children. Gallup poll type studies taken around the world show that most families want 4 children, and most families don't have 4 children. And until they do have 4 children, they're not interested in contraception, unless simply to space the timing of these 4 children. We've got to remember that man has been evolving and reproducing for 1 million years or more as we know him. And with every zig and zag in our evolutionary process that somehow reduced the efficiency of our reproductive mechanism or emotions, that was wiped out. So we've ended up today with a highly successful, highly developed single-mindedness and evolution, highly efficient reproductive system, and anybody who thinks that science is going to be able to circumvent this quickly and easily, I think, is overestimating the ability of science today. So let's not pin our hopes on
some new world-saving gadget soon to be discovered.
There is still, however, current family planning programs to rely upon. We have a number of countries, developing countries, with family planning programs. These are programs which freely make available information and contraceptives to anybody who wants them. We hear most about these programs when our foreign aid people come up before Congress asking for more money. We hear of the honor roll countries, I call them, because they're always the same countries: Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and South Korea. These countries have family planning programs, and their birth rate is falling. Ergo, give us more money for more family planning programs, and we now have the know-how to lower the birth rate throughout the world. What is not said by these people, however, is that the birth rate in Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, and South Korea began to fall before the family planning programs were started. Also not said is that while the birth rate has indeed fallen in these countries are still growing at a rate which will double their population in 30 years. One of the reasons why the birth rate has fallen is a change in marital status in these countries. These honor roll countries are so uniquely different from the rest of the developing world that there's really no basis for making a comparison. They've either had enormous, massive injections of foreign aid money, or they have had abnormal economic pressures which have completely upset their social structure. Kingsley Davis, the demographer at University of California, says that flatly that the birth rate in these countries has fallen not because of family planning programs, but because of industrialization and modernization, which is unique to these countries. There is simply no evidence today to show that we know how to carry out a family planning program in a manner which will reduce the population growth of a nation. No evidence. In Taiwan, the best studied program shows that the family planning program has increased the use of contraception, but only among families that have already decided the number of children they're going to have, and has helped them to space it, not to lower the number of children they want. In India, they have found that the women who are ready for birth control and the men ready for a vasectomy already have all the children they want. India, by the way, had the world's first government-sponsored family planning program. That was back in 1952, when that country's population was growing at the rate of 6 million a year. Today, the population is growing at the rate of 15 million a year. Now, what does this mean? This means that no matter how much money you give to family planning programs, how many Jeeps you sponsor, and how much birth control information you make available around the world, it still isn't going to have any real significance, because we have failed to find out how to motivate people to have fewer children. No one knows how, and 20 or 30 years is a mighty short time to overcome this million-year-old emotion of ours. Some feel that Red China may have the key to population control through their new policies of large-scale propaganda in behalf of family planning and delaying marriages through selective taxation and inadequate housing. Maybe so, but no one knows. At least no one in the West knows what's going on in Red China today. Edgar Snow, a longtime sympathizer for communist China, last year is quoted in Life magazine as having had a conversation with Mao Zedong. He told Mao Zedong that China has really showed the world in the last 5 or 10 years how to control the population growth in the developing world. Mao Zedong said, "Snow, you've been snowed," in essence. He said this, that in the rural areas, a mother still wants boy babies, and if she has 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 girls, she'll still keep trying until she has 9, By then she's 45 and may give up. In other words, China has no better idea, probably, than the rest of the world on how to control the population growth. Incidentally, a recent article in the New York Times, I've not checked the figures, using current State Department figures on the growth rate, population growth rate in China. If Red China's population continues to grow at its present rate for 60 years, China will have 6 times more people than does the entire world today. Obviously, something's going to happen before that statistic is fulfilled. The green revolutionaries who talk of agricultural science buying 2 or 3 decades of time in which to solve the world's population problem ignore the fact that those who will cause the population explosion, the population growth, are here today. They're born, they're with us, they're walking this planet. They're already here. Today, between 40 and 45% of all the people in the developing world of Asia, Africa, and Latin America are under the age of 15. Now, these children are going to grow up and have families of their own, and their families are going to have families of their own. So we have already built into the system, on stream, 50 to 60 years of continuous population growth, far more than the 20 or 30 years that the green revolutionaries are talking about. Taking India as an example, if the present trends continue, it will have a population of 1.5 billion in 29 years. If, on the other hand, some miracle took place, so that by 1985, every Indian had no more than 2 children from then on, never any more, India would still have well over 1 billion people by the middle of the next century. Thus, in this 20 or 30 years, we find that the Green Revolution has not essentially bought much for mankind. No new birth control method will be available within that time. No family planning program gives hope that parents will become motivated to want fewer children. Therefore, the Green Revolution may well be remembered as one more evidence that he who does not know his history is condemned to relive it. For is not the agricultural scientist doing exactly the same thing that the medical scientist did before him? Just as the medical scientist greatly prolonged man's life by discovering the cures to a wide range of heretofore fatal diseases, so now the agricultural scientist is eliminating, at least for a couple of decades, death from famine in certain parts of the developing world. Both types of persons have provided death control without, I re-emphasize, any corresponding form of birth control. It is a situation similar to the young minister who was giving his first sermon, and he was halfway through and he forgot what he was going to say. In seminary, he'd been told, if that ever happens, raise your hand and say, I'm coming. And revelation will come and he'll remember what to do. He did this, nothing happened, so he raised his hand again and said, I'm coming. A bit louder, with a little more confidence. Still, he couldn't remember what he was to say. So he raised up on tiptoe and said, I'm coming. Whereupon he lost his balance, fell in the lap of a lady over the pulpit, got up, apologized, and she said, that's all right, young man. You certainly gave me enough warning. Medical science certainly gave us enough warning. It lit the fuse to the population bomb half a century ago. And now agricultural science is trying to make the fuse burn faster on an even bigger bomb. For when agriculture finds itself unable to provide the ever greater amounts of food required for the additional population, and this could be only a few years away, then it is inevitable that we will see an increase in civil unrest, political instability, intensified threats of war, and on an ever-increasing scale, hunger, starvation, and famine. I object to the confidence which the Green Revolutionists have given many of us today, because the Green Revolutionists have told us because the Green Revolutionists have not told us what can be done in the 20 or 30 years that they have supposedly bought us. If the Green Revolutionaries are correct in their claims, then the agricultural scientist, like the medical scientist before him, is practicing his trade in a world that has yet to learn how to control its reproductive capacity. Clearly, the agriculturalist is himself a potential disaster maker. So what can be done about it? I don't know. Perhaps the beginning of action for all of us is not to be optimistic, not to sit back and assume that the Lord somehow will save man from his excessive procreation. Such an attitude would underscore the need for our concern to be first directed towards ideas which can curb the growth of population. Then, having put those ideas into practice, we can then concentrate on ideas which will give the world better health and more to eat. Thank you very much.
You have been listening to another in a series of lectures given on the campus of Iowa State University in Ames. Today, botanist and author Dr. William Paddock at Iowa State's Botany Club Lecture of the Year. Dr. Paddock's talk was entitled "The Agricultural Scientist, a Potential Disaster Maker." University Lecture is a presentation of Iowa State University Radio.
We don't do that really, can we? You know, well, of course, that would, I don't know. We might call this a mixed bag.